They called it Millbrook Inn, a place of warmth, laughter, and home-cooked meals nestled in the deep folds of Kentucky's Appalachian corridor. For travelers heading west, it was sanctuary. For lonely men with gold and grief in their hearts, it was something more, a promise, a seduction, a final destination. By all accounts, the Cunningham sisters were angels of the mountain: Margaret the mastermind, Catherine the siren, Sarah the alchemist, and Elizabeth, the innocent mask worn by evil's youngest face. Their smiles disarmed you, their voices softened your doubts, their kindness cloaked your murder. And what's most chilling, they never lifted a blade, they never raised their voices, they simply gave men what they craved most: attention, intimacy, the illusion of being seen. But behind the hearth fire and honeyed words, there was a darkness honed into ritual, a system of psychological targeting, a method of manipulation so elegant it wouldn't look out of place in today's intelligence agencies. These women weren't witches. They were something older, more strategic, more deliberate. Some say it began in 1827 when their father died and left the inn in their hands. But that's not the true origin. That's just the first body we could count. The truth goes deeper. Beneath floorboards, beneath tombstones, beneath generations of local silence held in place by fear, shame, and something worse, respect. Because even now, in the remote corners of Laurel County, old families speak the Cunningham name in hushed reverence, as if they weren't just murderers, but something sacred, something terrible that once offered men exactly what they wanted before taking everything they had. What you're about to hear is not a ghost story. It's an autopsy of charm, a dissection of how warmth becomes a weapon, and how the most dangerous predator wears a smile. Stay with me. This descent only goes darker. The first grave was never marked. It was November 1827 when a peddler named Elias Thorne disappeared along the old wilderness road. He was carrying tins of salve, bolts of fabric, and a pouch heavy with silver from recent trades. Witnesses said he'd planned to stop at Millbrook Inn. He never arrived at his next destination. No posse was sent. No investigation launched. Just another lost traveler, claimed by the cold or the Cherokee, they said. But the truth is, Elias Thorne was the trial run, the one who showed the sisters how easily a man could be erased, not just from the land, but from memory. Margaret tested the logistics, how long decomposition would take in the mountain caves. Catherine tested the psychology, how to read loneliness and mirror it back like a lover's gaze. Sarah tested the dosing, how to blend foxglove into tea without bitterness. And Elizabeth, barely 15, was the control, the angelic child face that made it all feel safe. They buried Elias with his arms folded and his mouth sewn shut, not from guilt, but symbolism. Margaret believed in control. Silence was the beginning of power. What followed was not murder for survival. It was optimization. In the ledger hidden beneath the kitchen floorboards, Margaret recorded everything, not just names and coinage, but emotional profiles. Notes like, Mr. F., grieving wife, suggests willingness to linger. J.W., Protestant, slow to trust, recommend Elizabeth softening. C.R., heavy drinker, weak liver may require less dose. This was not crime, it was design. Each victim was selected like a piece of chess strategy, not random, not frenzied, controlled. Over time, they refined it into an art. The sisters became mythic. Men who stayed at Millbrook wrote letters back home, overflowing with praise, warmth, even longing. Some proposed marriage, some offered land, some simply never left. But the numb air that matters is 63. 63 graves, each with a story, each with a secret stitched in silence. And you've only heard the beginning. You weren't supposed to know this, but you do now. And once you see how the world really works, how charm is currency, how empathy is weaponized, there's no going back. His name was Lieutenant Emery Pike, a war hero, a man not easily charmed, not easily fooled. He arrived at Millbrook in the spring of 1828, weeks after surviving a brutal skirmish near the Cumberland Plateau. His uniform still bore the stains of blood and smoke. His posture was straight, but his eyes had seen too much. He was exactly the kind of man the sisters didn't want to kill. Because Emery wasn't lonely, he wasn't desperate, he was watching. The ledger entry from that week, still preserved in a sealed envelope found decades later behind a false wall, reads, EP, strong mind, watchful, speaks little, sleeps lightly, dangerous. Margaret voted to send him on his way, but Catherine, always the boldest, said, "Let me try." That night, she approached him by the fire, as she had done with so many others. But Emery didn't melt. He didn't flirt. He asked questions, precise ones. Where did the beef come from? Why did the garden contain both medicinal and toxic herbs? How many travelers typically passed through this region in spring? Catherine smiled, lied, deflected, but she knew she had miscalculated. Later that night, he found Elizabeth in the stables. She was feeding the horses, humming a lullaby. When she saw Emery, she froze. She wasn't trained for questioning. She wasn't old enough to mask fear. "You been digging?" he asked gently, eyes flicking to the mud on her dress hem. Elizabeth shook her head, but it was too late. Emery was already following the scent of rot in the air, already counting the headstones in the cemetery and noticing there were more than local births or fevers could explain. At dawn, he saddled his horse. He would leave. He would report what he'd seen. He didn't make it a mile. That's when Sarah stepped in, not with poison, but something cruder. Belladonna mixed into a flask of rum Emery had taken with him. He drank it on tea. He rode, and his horse came back without him. His body was never recovered, but the sisters remembered. They had come within inches of exposure, and exposure to them was death. That's when Margaret made the rule: never take a man who asks questions. But the damage was done. Emery Pike's ghost, metaphoric or real, would haunt every decision that followed. Now, I ask you to prove you're listening. Comment below the phrase, "Silence is the first weapon." Write it twice. Lock it in. It was the summer of 1829 when the rules changed. Until then, the Cunningham sisters had one code they never broke: only lone men. No wives, no children, no attachments. But gold speaks louder than fear, and when the Duval family arrived, with coin, horses, heirlooms, and a wagon full of Virginia furniture, Catherine saw not a risk, but an opportunity. They were not travelers, they were settlers, on their way to Missouri, where they had purchased 90 acres, 3 generations. The patriarch Samuel Duval, his son Joseph, daughter-in-law Rachel, and 2 small children. A family. Whole, loud, happy, innocent. They only meant to stay one night. But Margaret noticed the heavy coin pouch Samuel tried to hide under his coat. She noticed the way Joseph carried his rifle with familiarity, militia-trained. She noticed how Rachel asked too many questions about the food, the water, the rooms. Margaret said, "We do not touch families." Catherine said, "What if we separate them?" And so began their most dangerous act. On the second night, Joseph Duval was invited on a hunt with Ezra and the Zimmer brothers. He was told it was local custom, a gesture of welcome. He never returned. Rachel was told he had fallen from a ridge and died instantly. Catherine, tears in her eyes, held Rachel's hand and whispered prayers for her soul. They offered the family an extended stay. "Let the children rest. We'll bury him with respect." Rachel, broken, agreed. On the 4th night, Sarah gave Samuel Duval a tea laced with monkshood, aconite. His heart stopped before dawn. Now only Rachel and the 2 children remained. Margaret panicked. This was not the plan. Too much noise, too many variables. But Catherine was calm. "We tell her she imagined it," she said. "That grief makes people forget." They told Rachel she had arrived alone, that there was no husband, no children, just her. She screamed, wept, begged, until Elizabeth hugged her and whispered, "You'll feel better after some rest." That evening, Rachel was given poppy syrup and never woke up. And the children? History refuses to record that part. The ledger's page for July 1829 was torn out, burned. But the cemetery at Millbrook gained 5 new graves. None with names, just numbers, etched in stone. After that, the sisters didn't hesitate again. They no longer just removed the lonely, they erased lineages. Still here? Then brace yourself, because what comes next is not a death. It's a transformation. By 1830, the Cunningham sisters were no longer innkeepers. They were architects of disappearance. Margaret no longer viewed the inn as a family business. It had become a machine, an ecosystem that harvested weakness and converted it into security, wealth, and silence. Each guest was now a variable in a complex equation of risk, reward, and ruin. Every smile was loaded, every gesture rehearsed. They did not see themselves as murderers. They saw themselves as keepers of balance in a broken world, because the truth was, men had begun to change. More travelers arrived drunk, violent, entitled. Some made advances toward Elizabeth. One struck Catherine across the face when she refused to serve him liquor after sundown. Another tried to force his way into Sarah's quarters, muttering that women in the wilderness owed something to men with guns. That man was never seen again, and Margaret added a new category to the ledger: men who deserve it. From this point forward, it wasn't just about profit. It was about cleansing. Millbrook Inn became a kind of moral tribunal, disguised in oak beams and firelight. If you crossed a line, if your soul reeked of rot, you didn't leave, and no one asked why. They began accepting guests that other inns turned away, drifters, outlaws, debtors fleeing justice, but not because they sympathized, because they knew no one would come looking. The inn itself began to change. Rooms once meant for comfort became chambers of analysis. Sarah installed hidden compartments in the walls to store personal items for later resale. The Zimmer brothers reinforced the cellar floor for body preparation. And Margaret created a signal system, simple gestures, or phrases that could instantly communicate whether a guest was a target, a watcher, or something worse. But the most terrifying change wasn't structural, it was emotional. The sisters no longer hesitated. The first time they'd taken a life, their hands trembled. Now, they slept soundly. Even Elizabeth, now 17, showed no remorse. She had learned how to fake innocence so perfectly. She didn't need to fake it anymore. It had become her armor, her weapon, her face. At Millbrook Inn, death no longer came with screams. It came with music, polite laughter, candlelight, no struggle, no blood on the walls, just silence, and the gentle closing of a door that would never open again. You're still here. That means you're not afraid of the dark. Good. Because in the next section, you'll learn about the guest who came with holy intentions and never left the chapel. It was the winter of 1831 when Father Leland arrived. He wasn't like the others. He didn't drink, didn't lie, didn't look at Elizabeth the way most men did. He came on horseback, carrying only a black leather Bible in a frostbitten hand. He said he was sent by the Diocese of Bardstown to deliver communion to remote travelers. A circuit priest, young, thin, and trembling from cold. Catherine offered him stew and a place by the fire. He declined both. "I must confess before I eat," he said. Margaret eyed him closely. This one was dangerous, not because he was evil, but because he was good. That kind of purity could unravel everything. A priest talked, a priest wrote letters, a priest had a memory that stretched beyond the woods. But Catherine disagreed. She said, "If we make him disappear, the church will send another." So they chose a new tactic. They let him stay. And for the first time in years, something shifted in the house. Elizabeth began attending his prayers. Sarah, who hadn't wept in 5 years, wept during a hymn he sang in the parlor. Even the Zimmer brothers stayed out of sight. It was as if the inn had been blessed. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th, Father Leland asked to see the chapel. Catherine hesitated. The chapel was more a storage room now, used only for show when pious guests arrived. Dust-coated hymnals, a cracked crucifix, no warmth. But she agreed. They led him inside. He knelt, prayed. Then he looked up and whispered something Catherine never forgot. "This place, it's full of spirits, but none are at peace." That night, he didn't eat, didn't speak, stayed in his room. The next morning, he was gone. His horse still in the stable, his coat on the peg, his Bible beside the bed. No sign of struggle, no blood, just absence. They searched for him, but not too hard. Margaret claimed the cold must have taken him in. The woods, that he wandered off, that he was never meant to stay. But Catherine knew better. The chapel door, which always stuck, now swung freely, and for weeks after, Elizabeth refused to enter the room. To this day, the chapel remains locked. Locals say it weeps in winter, that if you press your ear to the door, you can still hear hymns, and a voice begging for absolution. And yet the inn remained open, because the sisters had one rule left: never stop, never admit, never look back. By spring of 1832, the reputation of Millbrook Inn had shifted. It was no longer known for comfort or kindness, or even the warmth of its hearth. Among those who passed through Kentucky's hidden roads, it had taken on a new name, never said aloud, only whispered: the Inn of No Return. Of course, no respectable traveler called it that. They still arrived, still paid, still smiled. But the ones who knew, the drifters, bounty men, midwives, and fugitives, they avoided it, not out of fear, but respect, because something older than the sisters now lived in that house. It wasn't just the people who vanished anymore. It was the memory of them. Names were erased, stories ended mid-sentence. Men with entire lives behind them walked through the front door and never existed again. Sarah began keeping a journal, but not for record keeping. She wrote to God, or maybe against him. Each entry began with the same line: "Another lamb has come to the edge." And then details: what they wore, what they said, what their eyes did when they realized too late that they were prey. These weren't confessions, they were sermons. But as the deaths increased, so did something else. Activity. Windows began opening on their own. Guests reported knocking on the walls in the middle of the night, even when no one was on the other side. One woman, a pregnant widow, fled screaming after she claimed a cold hand pressed against her stomach while she slept. She later miscarried. The inn grew hungry, but not in the way it had before. Now it demanded attention. It wanted to be noticed. Elizabeth said it felt like the house had learned to watch, that it knew who would leave and who would never see daylight again. One night, lightning struck the chimney. The fire didn't catch, but for the first time since the inn opened, a crucifix fell from the wall and broke clean in half. They took it as a warning, but not from God, from within. Margaret responded by digging a new cellar beneath the old one, a place so deep it touched the water table. She called it the drowned room. Sarah refused to go down there. When Catherine asked what it was for, Margaret only said, "Some sins can't be buried in dry ground." He arrived barefoot, 7 years old, maybe 8, covered in soot and damp from the rain, dragging behind him a burlap sack that stank of mildew and blood. No one saw where he came from. No wagon, no parents. Just the boy, standing at the gate at dawn, eyes fixed on the inn like he'd been waiting his whole life to return. Catherine opened the door. Before she could speak, he said, "You left me in the ground. I heard you praying." She went still. Margaret stepped forward. "What's your name?" The boy looked her dead in the eye. "Same as yours." They took him in. What else could they do? He didn't ask for food, didn't sleep. He sat by the hearth all night, talking to shadows no one else could see. Elizabeth tried to bathe him once, but he screamed when the water touched his skin. His back was covered in welts, not fresh ones, old, scarred, and shaped like old ropes. When Sarah asked where his mother was, he answered, "She lives in the walls. She watches you when you lie." The sisters named him Thaddeus, though none of them agreed on why. Some nights, they found him scribbling on the floors with charcoal, symbols none of them recognized. Circles, teeth, wings without bodies. One night, Catherine awoke to find him standing at the foot of her bed. He whispered, "Don't go down there. He's not ready." She didn't ask what he meant, but she noticed the door to the drowned cellar had shifted open 1/2 inch. No wind, no draft, just invitation. Sarah started seeing things in mirrors, images that weren't her reflection. Margaret's hands shook when she tried to sew. Elizabeth stopped speaking entirely. And Thaddeus? He began humming, the same melody, over and over again, a lullaby Catherine's mother used to sing when they were children. But the voice wasn't Catherine's mother's. It was hers. A recording that had never been made, echoing from a time no one should remember. That night, Thaddeus spoke in his sleep. 37 more. Then the ground will stop screaming. When Margaret asked him who told him that, he smiled and pointed to the chapel door. Her name was Ruth Cunningham, daughter of Margaret, vanished in 1828. They buried an empty coffin when she disappeared. They said she'd drowned in the river, swept away after chasing a fox through the reeds, but no one saw her go in. No body surfaced, and for 4 years, her name was never spoken again. Until the night the storms came. Thunder cracked so loud it split a tree behind the inn. Rain poured sideways. The sky was thick with mud-colored clouds. Then just past midnight, a knock on the door, slow, steady, deliberate. Elizabeth opened it, and there stood Ruth, naked, hair matted with moss and insects, belly swollen, 8 months pregnant, at least. She stepped over the threshold without a word. The sisters backed away instinctively. Her eyes were not the same, not even human, yellowed, pupils like knives, and around her neck a necklace made from teeth, not animal, not adult, infant. Margaret collapsed. Sarah began to weep. Catherine tried to speak, but Ruth growled, a low animal sound, like something from a cave. She did not recognize her sisters, but she walked straight to the chapel and lay on the stone floor. She began to chant in a language no one understood. Elizabeth, fevered with fear, scribbled down fragments phonetically. Aru Kadhiz, Nolam Ekra, Sibria, Sibria. When they showed the phrases to a priest weeks later, he said nothing, just turned pale and demanded the paper be burned. That night, Ruth gave birth, but not to a baby, to a mass. Blood and bone and hair, but no form, no spine, no face, just a thing that writhed for 7 minutes and then turned to ash. She smiled the entire time. When it was over, she said clearly, "He took what was his. Now you'll give him what's yours." And then she vanished again into the storm. The next morning, Thaddeus was gone. So was the chapel's altar stone in its place. A single red feather, still wet, still twitching. No one touched it. That night the inn filled again, not with travelers, but with voices, coming from the graves, from beneath the floor, from the walls, and every voice whispered one word. Millbrook. Marshal Tobias Granger had seen evil. He'd chased outlaws through the black hollows of Appalachia, uncovered slaughterhouses masquerading as homesteads, found children in wells, wives in shallow graves, men buried upright to scream through the soil. But Millbrook Inn? That was something else. He came on horseback, August 7th, 1835. The sun refused to shine that day, not cloudy, just dim, like the sky itself didn't want to look down. He'd received anonymous letters, postmarked weeks apart, all written in the same frantic hand. 3 children, all dead, all buried behind the inn. The sisters know, God does not. When Granger arrived, the inn stood quiet, empty windows, door half open, no smoke from the chimney, no voices inside. Just a single scent hanging in the air. Earth after it's been disturbed. He found the sisters seated at the dining table, all 5, silent, smiling. He introduced himself. They didn't speak, just stared, until Sarah slowly placed something on the table, a spoon, bent backwards, bent against its grain. Metal fused into a knot, like it had been folded by fire. He asked them plainly, "Where are the children?" Margaret answered, "Some went home, some stayed, some listened too hard." Catherine stood and walked to the cellar door. "No one leaves without hearing it," she whispered. She unlocked the door. Marshal Granger stepped down into the dark. He did not scream. He did not come back up. But an hour later, the sisters heard scraping outside. They opened the back door and saw him, Marshal Tobias Granger, digging a grave. His badge lay on the ground. His gun had been broken in half and left inside the well. He dug all night, never looked up. Just before dawn, he climbed into the hole, laid flat on his back, and smiled. Then, using his bare hands, he began pushing dirt over his own chest. By sunrise, he was gone. A week later, his horse returned to town alone, saddle stained with blood and mud. Inside the saddlebag, someone had placed a note. He heard the name. He heard it too many times, and now it echoes forever. Father Elias Morrow arrived in Millbrook on September 2nd, 1835. He'd come at the desperate request of the nearby parish, whose members whispered that the inn was infected, not haunted, cursed. That people who passed it couldn't sleep for days, that livestock gave birth to eyeless calves, that every crucifix within a mile of the property had rotted from the inside out. Morrow didn't believe in ghost stories, but he did believe in evil. He brought with him a heavy Bible, a brass crucifix, and 6 vials of holy water, blessed by the bishop himself. He wore full vestments, walked the last 2 miles barefoot, and prayed the entire way. When he arrived at Millbrook Inn, the sisters were waiting on the porch, all dressed in black, all smiling, not kindly, knowingly. Father Morrow raised his crucifix and stepped forward. That's when he noticed the silence. No wind, no birds, not even insects. He opened the Bible to Psalm 91 and began reading aloud. "He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust." But as he read, the air changed. It grew wet, sticky, like the breath of something listening. He made it to the front door before the first vial of holy water shattered in his hands, boiling from the inside. He dropped the rest. Steam rose around him. The sisters watched. Father Morrow stepped inside the inn, and the floor moaned. In the chapel, the altar was gone. In its place, a shallow basin carved from stone, filled with water that wasn't water. It moved. He dipped his fingers in. It hissed, and then it spoke. In the voice of his long-dead mother, "You lied to me, Elias, when you were 12, about the cellar, about the boy." His hands began to shake. More voices came, overlapping, every secret, every sin, every unsaid thing he'd buried in prayer. One name repeated above the all: Ruth. He tried to flee, but the chapel doors slammed shut. He collapsed against the pews, vomiting black liquid. When the villagers found him hours later, he was barefoot in the road, eyes torn out, whispering only 2 words: "He's under." And in his clenched hand, torn fingernails and all, he held a single unburned page from his Bible. The verse: "And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever." September 6th, 1835. The man's name was Caleb Finch. He'd been a stonemason, a drinker, a God-fearing nobody with calloused hands and a rage that built like thunder. But when his daughter Mary disappeared, just 9 years old, he became something else, a man with nothing left to lose. The sheriff told him she'd probably run off. The preacher said maybe God had called her home early, but Caleb had seen the bruises on her arms the night before, had heard her scream in her sleep for the ladies with the needles. And the day she vanished, someone left a white lily on his porch, wrapped in linen, with a piece of lace torn from her favorite dress. Caleb followed the trail westward for 4 days, through woods, over rivers, past dead dogs nailed to trees and mirrors hanging from branches. He reached Millbrook Inn just after sundown. The building shivered when he touched it. The sisters were gone. The porch creaked. Candles lit themselves. He walked straight in, no prayer, no hesitation, and called out, "Mary." A voice answered, but it wasn't hers. It was his own, younger, drunk, screaming through the walls. "She ain't yours anyway, whore." The inn was remembering, or worse, repeating. He smashed through furniture until he found the trapdoor in the floor beneath the dining table. A spiral staircase descended into earth. He followed it. Down, down, into the belly of something alive. The walls pulsed, flesh-like, veined, and then he found the chamber. A great, round room beneath the inn, carved in precise geometry, every line etched with salt and teeth. In the center, a tay cradle, built of bone. Inside, nothing. Until he looked closer. It was breathing. Something unborn. Something waiting, wrapped in a fragment of Mary's dress. He reached in, and the chamber screamed, not sound, memory. Every cruelty he'd ever inflicted, every word he'd ever hurled, every time he didn't listen, didn't believe, didn't protect. He dropped to his knees, and that's when he saw her, not Mary, but something wearing her face, smiling. She spoke in a voice that was both his and hers. "You gave me to them. You opened the door. Now I open it. For him." Behind the cradle, a second door opened. In the ground. Breathing. Pulsing. Wet. And from it came the sound of something vast. Waking up. That night, the townspeople gathered. Torches, axes, salt, scripture. The inn had become a wound on their land, a bleeding place. Birds no longer flew over it. Milk turned sour when brought too near, and children woke up screaming with their mouths full of dirt. So they came to burn it, led by Sheriff Greaves, who'd lost both his sons in a month. Behind him, Widow Thatcher, whose baby was born with eyes on its tongue. And the mill boy, Jesse, who'd seen the sisters walking in the woods, floating, a full foot above the earth. They came ready, but the inn was waiting. It didn't stand still anymore. It breathed. The walls shifted as they approached, aging backwards, rotting forward, flickering like a memory being rewritten in real time. Sheriff Greaves lit the first torch, but when he hurled it toward the front steps, the fire vanished, not extinguished, swallowed, as if the very air around the inn had learned hunger. Then the sisters appeared, not walking, not floating, unfolding, from the walls, from the trees, from the shadows of the men's own minds, no longer in black dresses. They wore the townspeople's sins. Thatcher saw her dead husband, smiling, soaked in oil. Jesse saw the man he'd killed by accident last summer, his throat still bubbling. Greaves saw his sons, alive, begging. But when he ran to them, their mouths opened too wide, their eyes rolled back, and they hissed, "You left the door open, Father. You lit the match." Panic. Axes flew, salt was thrown, and still the inn did not burn. The torches died, the earth cracked, and the name began, a sound, not a word, something syllabic and wet, like language, before language. It spread through the crowd like a virus of thought. Some dropped to their knees, others gouged out their own ears. Greaves managed one final command: seal it, bury it, salt the roots. And they did. They collapsed the foundation, poured salt and ash and blood into the cracks, buried the remains of the inn under 3 tons of stone, and for 50 years no one spoke of it again. But things buried in salt do not sleep. They ferment. They become. Autumn, 1883. The Louisville-Nashville Railroad was expanding through Millbrook County, Kentucky. No one remembered the inn. No one remembered the sisters. The ground had been quiet for 50 years, until the digging started. 3 men with shovels, a dynamite charge, and a hollow beneath the earth that rang like a mouth exhaling. They called it a catacomb, said it must have belonged to some forgotten chapel, but what they found wasn't limestone or brick. It was cow bone, pressed into geometric shapes, spiraling patterns, the kind that made your eyes ache just to trace them. Then they found the cow cradle, still whole, still wet, still breathing. Inside it lay a girl, no older than 10, pale as ash, wrapped in linen and lace, her eyes opened. Not suddenly, slowly, like she had been waiting for this exact moment, like she had already seen them coming in her dreams. Her lips moved, no sound, so they leaned in, and that's when she smiled. The foreman, Thomas Avery, called for backup. He was a sober man, a former priest, a veteran of war. He'd seen bodies mangled by cannon fire, children starved in camps, mothers clawing at the dirt to bury their dead. But nothing terrified him like the sound that came out of that hole when the sun hit the girl's face. A single note. High-pitched, endless, not sung, but echoed, from somewhere beneath the ground, as if something recognized her, as if something claimed her. The workers fled. Avery stayed. for hours. When the company men returned that night, they found him kneeling before the cradle, eyes gouged out, a smile stitched into his cheeks, written in blood beside him, in perfect cursive. "She dreams in his image, she walks in our place." The girl was gone, vanished. No prints, no blood, only the faint scent of burning lace. That winter, 3 children from nearby far, Mrs. vanished without a trace. Their mothers reported seeing women in black near their homes, offering flowers and humming lullabies no one could understand. A new church was built on the site the next spring, but every Easter since, the lilies bloom. Black. Present day. Paranormal podcaster Liam Mercer wasn't looking for trouble. He was just chasing clicks. A former theology student turned online sleuth, Liam had built a following with his YouTube series, Churches That Shouldn't Exist. His audience loved cursed convents, haunted hymns, forgotten saints with bloodied eyes. So when an anonymous tip led him to Millbrook, Kentucky, he thought he'd struck gold. An old railway camp, a buried inn, a tale of sisters who fed the land. It was perfect. Liam packed a mic, a drone, and a set of stolen blueprints from the Appalachian Railroad archives. He didn't believe in demons, didn't care about warnings. He just wanted a good story. What he found was a name, scratched into an iron plate buried beneath the roots of a black willow tree behind the old foundation. A name in no language spoken now, but somehow familiar. 5 syllables, spelled backward and forward the same. Impossible to pronounce with a human tongue until you've heard it. So Liam said it, out loud, on camera, into the mic. Live. 37 people tuned in that night. They heard static, then shrieking, then whispers, layered over each other, like thousands of voices trying to speak at once through his throat. The stream went black for 17 minutes. When it resumed, Liam was gone. Not missing, gone. His clothes were there, his gear untouched, the mic still recording. But all that remained of Liam Mercer was a faint imprint in the soil, as if something had lifted him gently into another shape. In the days that followed, his subscribers reported strange phenomena. One man claimed his daughter began humming lullabies in a language she'd never learned. A woman in Idaho said her walls began bleeding brine whenever she replayed the episode. A group of listeners organized a Discord call to discuss the name, Only for All. 11 participants to suffer simultaneous cardiac arrest at 3:33 a.m. The audio from the stream was banned on all major platforms, but fragments still exist, spliced into cursed TikToks, buried in vaporwave tracks, hidden in the white noise of relaxing rain videos. And when you hear it, you'll dream of the sisters. You'll feel the salt between your teeth. You'll know the craving. Love, given freely. Death, offered gently. June, present day. They started as postcards, then full letters, pressed parchment, sealed in wax, scented with lavender and salt. Every one of them bore the same elegant script. The inn is open again. We await your return with love and devotion. The sisters. They were addressed to people who had never set foot in Millbrook, Kentucky, people with no memory of the place. But when they read the letters, they remembered. A woman in Chicago, a high-powered lawyer with no known relatives, collapsed after reading hers, muttering something about a cradle made of bone. A boy in Ohio had night terrors for a week, screaming about the nursery with no ceiling. A retired postmaster in Maine received one and simply walked into the woods, never to return. On his kitchen table was scrawled a single word in ink that smelled like iron: obedience. What investigators couldn't explain was that all recipients, thousands across the U.S., shared a common bloodline. They were descendants of the original townsfolk of Millbrook, the ones who disappeared in 1827. DNA databases lit up. Ancestry algorithms crashed. A genealogist at Stanford traced it all back to a single point. One woman, born in 1782, died in 1833. Name: Miriam Cunningham. Her record had been lost, buried in a church fire, the kind blamed on lightning but never investigated. But now her bloodline had bloomed across states, unnoticed for 2 centuries, scattered, sleeping, until they were called back. The letters contained no threats, no instructions, just a date, a location, and a strange symbol pressed into the wax seal. Circle of cradles surrounding a human heart. Dozens obeyed the call. Some flew, some drove, some walked barefoot for miles. By late June, they stood at the edge of the Millbrook woods, silent, waiting. Children, grandmothers, software engineers, teachers, people who'd never met each other, now moving in eerie synchrony, and when the first one crossed the tree line, the ground shifted. The sky turned bruised pink. The trees whispered in unison, "We are the sisters. You are the seed. Come home." The new inn was never seen by satellite, but locals report lights humming and a smell like lilac rot and seawater. No one returns. And yet, more letters are being sent. She walks with bare feet on stone that's always warm. The Millbrook Inn has no clocks, no windows, no front door, and yet people keep arriving. They come in silence, one by one. Dressed in modern clothes, carrying backpacks, iPhones, trauma. But when they cross the threshold, the air changes them. Their memories rearrange, their names soften, their eyes adjust to the golden dimness. They forget the world they came from and remember only the lullaby. In cradles keep, we do not cry. We sing you down. We kiss goodbye. She, once a girl named Abigail, now called only First Sister, welcomes them at the corridor. Her voice is a hush of wind through salt grass, her dress stitched from scraps of every life she never lived. The other sisters, 62 of them, follow behind her like shadows. Each cradle in the inn has a name carved into the base, some in Latin, some in tongues no human throat can speak, some in the same voice Liam Mercer captured just before he vanished. One by one, the descendants of Millbrook lie down, some in the cradles, some beneath them, some simply vanish into the walls like breath into cloth. The sisters tuck them in, not with blankets, but with obligations fulfilled, with burdens laid down, with secrets surrendered. Each cradle rocks itself, each guest, before their final breath, smiles. Above the inn, the air is quiet. Birds avoid the trees. The moon refuses to rise over it. But beneath the foundation, something ancient moves, slowly and with purpose. It is not a god. It is not a demon. It is what remains when love is offered, forever, and death is being softly negotiated. Its heartbeat is the lullaby. Its tongue is the brine. Its arms are the sisters. And the world, all of it, is simply waiting to return to the cradle, one by one, until the map is full of graves marked not with stone, but with names written in on the wind. And if tonight, in your sleep, you hear knocking that comes from beneath the floorboards, Don't answer. Don't pray. Just listen for the lullaby, because once you hear it, you're already home forever.